Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new NVIDIA, almost said Tesla, NVIDIA update video. So today, as per usual, ladies and gentlemen, let's go over NVIDIA stock. Let's go over what is happening to NVIDIA stock, what we can expect moving into next week, into a fresh month. And I'll give you my honest thoughts and opinion, of course. Naturally speaking, this is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. This is just my opinion, of course. This is just educational, or not, this is not educational. This is just for fun. Maybe it's educational, whatever. Point is let's jump into it. If you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice. Again, all that stuff. I just want to make that very clear. But yeah, if you enjoy my technical analysis, again, I do have a membership section where I just, I share my thoughts, I share my charts, I share the technical analysis, I share the options flow. For $3 a month, it gives you that Tesla tier where you get all that I just said for Tesla stock every day the market is trading, as the market is trading throughout the trading day. $5 a month gives you access to that plus NVIDIA, and then $7 a month gives you access to Tesla, NVIDIA, plus non-Tesla, non-NVIDIA stocks as well that I share with my members. And I also actually do chart requests over the weekend. So if you're interested, link is below. But jumping into it, NVIDIA closing the day down almost 3% on the day, closing at 135 and change. So what does this mean for the stock? Is this finally over? Is the uptrend done? Is it time to correct, or are the bulls still safe? Well, I'll give you my thoughts right now. The market, it's concerning because the NVIDIA, there's two ways to look at this, right? Let's start with the 1 hour. I'm gonna do the same thing I did with Tesla and start with the 1 hour. So if I zoom into the stock, right? If I look at the 1 hour, you can, if I zoom out like this, you can see this uptrend that clearly has been a beautiful uptrend for NVIDIA. It's bounced off of it every single time. What did it do just now? It finally fell below that. That is concerning, right? That is absolutely a bit of a concerning sign. So if you zoom into it, there's a bit of a problem here. There's definitely a bit of a problem. And this just looks to me like a very nice looking bear flag. It could go a little bit higher, closer to 136, but this looks pretty textbook bear flag to me right now to ultimately make its way lower. Potentially even as early as next week, right? Can happen pretty quickly, naturally. So let's watch for that moving into next week, especially early next week. That'll be important. But that's kind of what I'm seeing, right? We broke the trend line. We broke below 136. I mentioned how I want to see 136, 135, something like that. But going down below it is concerning. Well, we ended up going down below it. We ended up closing below it, right? So now, naturally, this area that right here you can see was an area of massive resistance that we did break above. That could have been a support and headed higher for at least one more high. Well, we broke below it. Now, naturally, I would expect this area, just like those 3 times before, to be a resistance. And if so, this would be nothing more than a bear flag into supply, into a continuation downwards. First target will be closer to the 130s, like low 130s, 130 itself maybe even, right? However, the daily looks okay still. And the reason I say the daily looks okay still with a very large asterisk, which I'll go over why, is because, well, it's arguably still closing above the trend line, which is why sometimes zooming into like the 1 hour is very effective because you can see something that the daily maybe won't show you in terms of the finer detail. But arguably, just as importantly, it is still closing above that 8 exponential moving average. So the daily in that sense looks not as bad as when you zoom into the 1 hour and you kind of see that, the more concerning signs potentially. So that's where it's a little bit conflicting. But again, we still have that bearish divergence on the RSI, which is I've been talking about for quite some time. We have the bearish divergence on, of course, the MACD as well, where the stock also went higher. MACD clearly didn't. So we are seeing that sort of buyer exhaustion essentially kicking in on NVIDIA. And of course, if we end up losing this trend line and the 8 exponential moving average on the daily, that will be another sign of concern, which we're getting pretty close to, because you have to understand, right? This uptrend has been pretty aggressive on the daily, right? Every time we've come to this trend line, we've been bouncing pretty aggressively. You have to remember, if we do not essentially continue bouncing very aggressively, so in other words, if NVIDIA doesn't get a large gap up in the pre-market on Monday, that would be a concern. Why? Because even just going sideways gets you pretty much out of this trend line and back down below it because, you're not trending up anymore, right? And that would be a concern because then we're going to lose this very aggressive momentum to the upside with this trend line, right? Now we'll naturally just open up below it, and that would be a concern. So that's kind of one thing I'm eyeballing that, according to the 1 hour, it's suggesting that is a very real possibility. So let's watch for that into early next week. But again, those factors, that could potentially result in a bit more concern for the stock, right? Then the divergences that we're seeing, of course, like I've been mentioning for a few days now, are a bit of a concern. So let's see how that plays out into next week. Now, the market itself actually doesn't look as bad as NVIDIA does, in my opinion. Still concerning signs as well. Still has that bearish divergence, right? But it is actually holding the 8 exponential moving average, and it looks a little bit less concerning overall. At least SPY does. SPY actually looks better than Q's. Q's looks a little bit more flimsy, to be completely honest with you. Overall, the best case scenario I see for the market right now, to be completely honest with you, is if the market does indeed push higher, it'll be one more high, and then I think from there it begins the correction. This is like the best case scenario, or it just happens right now. I don't know which one it'll happen, right? I don't know for sure, but even if we have that push up, I don't expect it to be something insane. So that's just my honest opinion. So let's see how that plays out. But Going back to NVIDIA, right? The daily, that's kind of the problem. So if we do end up losing this trend line, we lose that 8 exponential moving average, blah, blah, blah. I do expect NVIDIA to make its way down. What am I doing? Make its way down to, go back here, beautiful, it's kind of weird. At the very least 130, right? That's the first target. But my ultimate target would be essentially a move that would look along the lines of this, all the way back down to about 123, pretty much the low 120s roughly. That will be my main target to the downside on NVIDIA stock moving into it. So let's see how that plays out ultimately, right? But I would view that as an opportunity. Exponential moving averages are still bullish. I would still view this 123 zone, worst case scenario, closer to actually 120. I would still view this as a massive opportunity, right? And if we go to the weekly time frame, it kind of reinforces that. Why? Well, because, yeah, it's a pretty concerning looking weekly candle, right? Very large selling pressure, evidently so. So, it's looking a little bit flimsy, right? Not looking like it's the best thing in the entire world. Absolutely, no questions asked. But the good news is the fact that if, let's say, NVIDIA does get that sell, and let's say NVIDIA does make its way back down to about, 120 to 123, we'll say roughly, right? Give or take, of course. I actually would view that as a very bullish thing. Why? Because this would just essentially be an absolutely, at least as of right now, who knows what'll happen by then, but as of right now, that to me seems like the sweet spot for fresh bulls to come in and reignite the stock to move higher ultimately, right? Because that's where the exponential moving averages are sitting. We are pretty far from them. And that's arguably going to be just nothing more than this very large weekly trend line breakout retest, right? That'll look something along the lines of this, and we head higher. That's kind of my current expectation. Now, I have this head and shoulders pattern here. You can see just as a reminder, I guess, that is still a concern. But again, I've said it before, I don't think it's going to play out, personally speaking. But that's kind of my expectation on NVIDIA, right? I do expect something along the lines of that to play out, right? More or less, give or take. So if I ever see NVIDIA over the next, again, this will take time, keep in mind. Maybe it'll happen fast, but it'll most likely take some time. Come down there. It'll take some time to even get there in the first place, easily some weeks ahead, of course, no doubt about that. If I ever see NVIDIA back down to 120 to 123, I absolutely will be viewing that as an opportunity. No questions in my mind whatsoever, at least as of right now, unless something changes, of course, right? So again, just figured I'd mention that. Let's see how that plays out. But that's kind of my current expectation on the stock and what I see coming forward, short term, the daily, and even the weekly, right? That's kind of my overall perspective. So let's see what actually happens with that as we move into a fresh month of June. But yeah, going over the options flow very quickly before I end off the video. Pretty mixed here, pretty mixed, not gonna lie. Towards the end of the day, pretty mixed. Options flow overall is pretty light. We have a nice 2.9 million call, but it is a few months out, so it's looking pretty okay. But I imagine they're probably pretty under the water right now. This was bought when NVIDIA was at 133.7. Actually, no, they got it pretty nicely. That was a pretty nice entry. So maybe they know something I don't. Let's see how that plays out. Again, if NVIDIA gets a nice, pretty decent gap up on Monday, that could actually save the situation that's applying on the daily and the 1 hour chart. That will save that situation. So this stock needs a gap up. It needs a gap up on Monday. Let's see if we get that or not. But otherwise, I would expect us to begin this little downtrend back to these very nice looking bullish zones for a nice continuation higher after that is my current expectation, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of bulls get very upset when you say the stock will go down. That's how things move, guys. If you're a true bull, that's what you want to happen. Trust me, you don't want the stock to go parabolically up because it will fall parabolically back down. And I promise you that it happens every time. You want it to get a nice, clean movement, beautiful movements, right? That's what you want. And you want to see it come back down to these levels. You want fresh bulls to come in and bring the stock back up. That's what you want to happen. That's how things move, right? So let's see if we actually get that. But yeah, that's kind of my overall expectation. Let's see what plays out. But thank you all so much for watching. See you on Monday. Peace.